Thank you, Rob. Thank you for having me, and thank you for the kind introduction. The last time I spoke to an Irish audience, I played this game with everyone. I know Irish people like to guess accents. So with that, if you guess mine correctly at the end of the 15 minutes, you can come to our Aeon stand. It's just at the back of the hall, and there's a goodie bag waiting for you. Now, to be fair, there's only 2, so be quick about it at the end of the next break. With that, during this talk, I hope you listen to the content of my presentation as well, not just the intonation of my voice, but maybe my first story, which Rob kindly introduced, will capture your imagination anyhow. Oh, there we go. It starts about 1,000 years ago with Genghis Khan creating the largest land-based empire in the history of humankind. Now, you might wonder, where is he going with this? Like, what does Genghis Khan have to do with us in HR? And one of the things he did, or maybe I should say his success did not come from nothing. He deployed some people practices that today we've come to equate with some of the most successful big tech firms out there. How many people have talked about skills today, or will be talking about skills on the next panel? We all have skills work streams in our organizations. We're all thinking about how do we build the skills today that make our businesses successful tomorrow. Guess what? Genghis Khan knew exactly which skills would win him the day. That picture portrays it pretty well. The core skill of his army was the ability to shoot an arrow backwards while riding a horse. Now, he also understood how to build skill proficiencies. So he hyper-differentiated pay for his top performers. So the more arrows you could shoot backwards while riding a horse, the better your pay. Hyper-differentiation of pay is most definitely one of the things we've come to equate with big tech. Where else can you quadruple your base pay? Where else can you out-earn your superiors? The answer is big tech and the Mongolian horde. The other thing that Genghis did was he hired for potential. One of his most successful generals was a guy called Jebi. He was also, at a time, one of his most formidable adversaries. Genghis managed to defeat him but what he did afterwards was he made him an offer to join him. After having witnessed in what we would call today sort of like a work sample in the world of occupational psychology. During that work sample, he witnessed sort of like his capabilities, his potential, and he decided to make Jebi an offer to join him. Now, the alternative offer was to decapitate him. But maybe unsurprisingly, Jebi joined him. What did Genghis do? He compensated him at the top of the market range. He differentiated his pay. He paid him in that top quartile because he understood what the pay lever means within the context of his EVP. How does the pay lever impact retention and loyalty of his most trusted people going forward? And Angela, you said it so well. Higher pay, higher performance. And Genghis understood this 1,000 years ago, and that lesson still rings true today. Now, from Genghis to AI, I really didn't do myself any favors with that segue. But if you think back to the pay lever for a second, and let's take a look at Netflix. Do you remember the Hollywood writers' strike not so long ago? It was at that exact moment in time that Netflix decided to publish their head of AI-generated content role. Now, this is exactly what the writers went on strike for, so you could 100% question the timing of that decision. But what we also have in the US right now, pay transparency laws are already a thing in multiple states. So that means the pay range for that role was readily available. And what was it? The upper end of the pay range ended at $900,000. So let that sink in for a minute, like $900,000 base pay. That's quite significant. That highlights for me, the strategic importance of these skill sets that companies like Netflix place on them, but it also highlights the scarcity of these skills in the market. Now, at Aon, we also manage or measure or monitor labor market trends. One of the things we look at is how a job advertisement is changing in terms of AI skill requirements. One of the things we've seen last year is in the role of the software developer, requirements around AI skills have quadrupled. In the role of the research scientist, they have nearly doubled. So that really translates into two things for me. We see AI skills entering the workforce faster than ever before, and we see a much higher premium that we've ever seen on specific skill sets being placed on this right now, linked to the scarcity. Now, the other number that I wanted to share with you, it's not on the slide, but it's 22. You might wonder where am I going with 22. It's 22%. 22% is the number, or is the percentage of our average workforce that will be impacted severely by AI. In Aon, we've done quite a bit of research on the impact of AI on the average job, and we've worked it out on a job-by-job basis. So we know that 22% of all jobs will be significantly impacted by AI and technology over the next 3 to 5 years. That's quite a significant number. That's nearly a quarter of our workforce that we need to do something about. And if I think about all these three things together, as purpose to the design of the slide, AI skills are really expensive, they're scarce and in high demand, and a lot of our workforce, or a significant chunk of our workforce, is in dire need of up and reskilling. Could we not solve for this differently? Could we not think about building some of these skill sets in-house? And I would argue we definitely can. There's really good examples out there. Actually, quite like your career development framework, which goes into that direction, Angela. But also, there's the example of Siemens. Siemens is a really good example of an organization, has a lot of very manual jobs. And one of the things Siemens has done is they introduced what they call the Siemens Future Fund. That is a pot of money that is being made available to employees who see their jobs become obsolete because of technological advances. That pot of money, or the reskilling and upskilling opportunities that you can pursue as an employee, is tied to what they call their future skills framework. So they have built a future skills framework linked to future areas growth for the business, and they're helping their employees reskill into exactly these pathways. They thought about the challenge that we outline here. They understood the challenge, they framed it, and they put a very specific solution into place. Pretty cool, if you ask me. Now, Siemens, in all of this, looked at skills. Skills is an interesting topic, in particular when we want to understand the impact of AI on a role. It's much better for us to look at roles at a skill level to understand how AI will impact a role. The reason why, if you think about EQ in a lot of ways is now our new premium skill. EQ is probably a skill or a skill set that is less likely to be impacted by AI in the short to medium term. Writing, on the other hand, probably is. I have to admit, and please don't tell my son, I use ChatGPT to use my goodnight stories every night, to write my goodnight stories every night. And my son is 4, so typing in things like fire engine, dinosaur, and life lesson creates pretty compelling stories. But I digress. So when we think about skills, what do skill profiles actually look like? And I wanted to test the audience on this. Now, there's 2 roles here. So your way, on the left is role A, on the right is role B. There are 2 skill profiles. They're based on Aon data that we've extracted from the market to work out what are some of the top key skills for these 2 roles. One of them is a data scientist. One of them is not a data scientist. So I'm going to ask the audience, and I'm just going to ask for a quick show of hands, who thinks the role on the left is that of the data scientist? Please raise your hand. Yeah, 1, 2. Ooh. So who thinks it's the one on the right? Yeah, so everyone that voted for the one on the right, you're correct. Now, does anybody want to shout out and give me a guess on what the role on the left is? Any guesses? It's a really difficult one. It's an organizational psychologist. And this is the beauty of skills. When we start to understand skills, we can think about the world of talent very differently. What does the fungibility of talent truly mean? This, like if you think about it from a sourcing perspective, hiring data scientists can be difficult, it can be expensive. Can we explore other pools or other talent pools as a result? We can. If you look at the organizational psychologist and the profile of that, there's actually quite a high degree of overlap. So with a bit of upskilling, maybe we can repurpose the org psychologist to become our data scientist of the future. And I'll give you another secret about organizational psychologists. Some of these things in here, from a skills perspective, are much closer related to EQ. So that means there's an emphasis on the softer skills side in the role of the org psychologist that are not as prevalent as in the one for the data scientist. Now, if I think about that, in the world of AI, that might just translate into the skill set of the org psychologist being slightly more future-proof. With that, we employ quite a lot of psychologists in Aon. Please don't go off, hire our psychologists. We do need them. But the other thing that I wanted to chat about was the state of the tech industry. Now, we monitor things like layoffs across the tech industry. 2 weeks ago, that number was at 35. Today, the number is at 193, affecting 50,000 employees. That's quite staggering in terms of just sort of like the sheer number of layoffs that have been announced in a 2-week period. And the industry as a whole is under significant pressure from a cost perspective. Not so long ago, it was going from strength to strength, and had money was readily available to invest in a whole range of pretty cool things. I don't know, like if you ever come across this, but Salesforce used to do their onboarding on this beautiful ranch on the west coast of the US. One of my friends actually got to go, and he was sending me pictures, and it was gorgeous, and I was jealous. Now, in the sort of like the time of cost pressures, that branch got the cut last year. That ranch got the cut last year. And I think, to be fair as well, around sort of like the tech industry, there's the cost component, and then the industry itself is maturing as well. So stakeholder pressures on tech organizations have changed. Meta actually decided to pay a dividend. 5 years ago, that would have been unthinkable. So that would have been unthinkable. So we're seeing sort of like the tech industry changing, but I think there's a lesson in all of that for us. We are all experience good times, which the tech industry have, but managing our workforce is always a balance between cost and impact. Not every perk, not every benefit will make a difference to our performance at the end of the day. We need to understand which ones do. The tech industry, for example, understood that hyper-differentiating pay is a key part of their EVP and by extension their USP. They didn't touch that principle during these sort of like cost reduction measures. They understood this is the thing that makes us stand out. This is part of the reason why people come to work for us. And this is a question that in this room we should all be asking ourselves when we think about our organizations. What makes us stand out? What is our USP? What are we known for in the market? What are the things we want to double down on? We don't have to be everything to everyone. There's things that we can really excel at. We don't have to excel at everything. We just need to understand the things that we want to be good at. Now, that brings me on to my last topic, and I'll be relatively quick on this. It's the EU Pay Transparency Directive. Now, that is coming in June 2026, and what does it set out to do? It sets out to make pay more transparent across the EU. It really is in the name. But what does it mean in practice? Employees will have the right to understand where on a pay range they sit and how they compare to others doing work of equal value. For some of us, answering that question will be easy. For some of us, that will be hard. But what it requires of us is to have compensation practices in place that are mature. We need to have solid job architectures. We need to have solid job evaluation methods. We need to have a way to determine our pay equity, which, by the way, Angela, to your point earlier, is very impressive to see that there's no issues on the pay equity side, which is highly unusual. Vast majority of firms always have somewhere between 5 to 3% of an unexplained pay gap. So very, very impressive. Kudos. But really, when it comes to pay transparency, I'm going to skip through this for a second because I'm nearly at time. One of the things we can think about is this construct of total transparency. So in the past, I think we've always sort of like went back to communicating different pillars of our EVP separately. Did we truly put a value or quantify what our career development offering means? Do we really communicate our benefits to everyone? Does everybody understand the value of our benefits? Does everybody understand the value of their pay? And in the context of the EU pay transparency perspective, does everybody understand that in the context of the market? So how do you compare to others? That's one of the big things that the EU Pay Transparency Directive will drive. And we can take, I would argue, this directive and turn it into an opportunity for us. We don't have to see it as a burden. This can be a way for us to differentiate in a busy market. Total transparency, where we put a value on every aspect of our EVP, is a thing that we can very, very easily realize. Now, my very last slide, my very last point, I wanted to leave you with one stat, and that is that last year was the lowest average rate of unemployment on record for OECD countries. Some of our speakers will talk today about the employer market. Are we truly in an employer market? We're seeing us moving towards it, but overall, I would argue that we're still some ways away from it. We find ourselves in a market that's more expensive than ever before. We find ourselves in a market that's more competitive than ever before, and we find ourselves in a market that is most definitely not awash with candidates. In all of this, we need to understand how do we stand out. We need to understand the data that we can use to help us understand what makes us unique and how we can differentiate and compete. With that, thank you. I hope you took something away from this.